My name is Clara Vance, and I'm 35. 6 days after we buried my mother, my brother changed the locks on the house I grew up in and set my daughter's things on the porch in the rain. Lily's sneakers were soaked through. Her stuffed rabbit was face down in a puddle. And Mason stood in the doorway, our father's doorway, the doorway of a house that's been in this family since 1890, and told me I was nobody. The land stays with the Vance son. He said, "Girls marry out. You should have learned that a long time ago." He said more after that. He said, I should enjoy being homeless. He said he'd made sure I'd get nothing. But here's what Mason didn't count on. There was one final section to that will. And when the lawyer read it out loud, when he announced my net worth to a room full of people who'd spent my entire life calling me the leftover child, my brother hit the floor. Welcome back to Red Wine Revenge, the channel where quiet people finally get the last word and the paperwork does the shouting. If a family ever made you feel like the spare child, the one they forgot to count, this one's for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is, and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to Meridian, Idaho. Population 8,000, give or take, where the Vance name still means something. Or at least it used to. Meridian sits where the Snake meets the Boys River. It's the kind of town where people know your grandfather's name and your credit score and which pew you sit in on Sundays. The Vances helped build half the houses on Front Street. My great-grandfather started the shop Vance & Son Woodworks in 1947, and the sign still hangs on 3rd Street in hand-carved walnut. My father, Arthur Vance, ran that shop for 31 years. He was good with his hands and terrible with his daughters. I say daughters, but there was only one, me. And then there was Mason, 6 years older, the firstborn son, the one whose name fit the sign. Growing up, the division was simple. Mason went to the shop after school. I went to the kitchen with my mother, Martha. Mason learned to joint boards and read blueprints. I learned to make casseroles and keep quiet. My father had a phrase he repeated like a prayer. Every Thanksgiving, every property tax season, every time someone asked about the business, the land stays with the Vance son. Girls marry out. He said it the way you'd say the sun rises in the east. Not cruel, just fact. Martha would press her lips together and pass the potatoes. I'd stare at my plate and count the peas. When I was 15, I asked my father if I could work in the shop on Saturdays. He looked at me like I'd asked to rewire the house. "What for?" he said. "You're not staying." I left Meridian 3 years later with a duffel bag and a flat carpenter's pencil my father had given me when I was 9, the kind carpenters use with the wide graphite. He'd tucked it behind my ear one afternoon and said, "There, now you look like a Vance." It was the only time he ever said that to me. I put myself through Boise State accounting degree, then a master's in forensic accounting, the kind of work where you follow money through shell companies and fake invoices until you find the person who thought they were smarter than the spreadsheet. I was good at it, really good. By 26, I was working at a firm in Portland, pulling apart fraud cases that made the evening news. By 29, I'd started my own shop, Vance Forensic Group. 3 employees, then 8, then 22. I built it in a rented office above a sandwich place on High Street, and I built it alone. Mason called my work the calculator job. My father called it something to do until you settle down. Martha, my mother, just asked if I was eating enough. Nobody in Meridian knew what forensic accounting was, and nobody cared to learn. At family dinners, when Mason talked about the shop expansion or his plan to flip spec houses, my father leaned in and nodded. When I mentioned closing a 7-figure fraud case for a Fortune 500 client, he'd say, "That's nice, Clara. Pass the rolls." So I stopped mentioning it. I stopped bringing up the firm, the clients, the growth. I kept the carpenter's pencil in the inside pocket of my bag, a flat rectangle of cedar and graphite that smelled like the shop, like sawdust in my father's hands. I carried it everywhere, not because I missed him exactly, because it reminded me what a Vance was supposed to look like and how quietly I'd become one. Anyway, by the time I sold a majority stake in the firm in 2023, my net worth was north of $5 million. My family thought I rented a 1-bedroom apartment and drove a Honda because I couldn't afford better. I drove a Honda because I liked it. Nobody ever asked. My father died 14 months ago. Heart attack. He was standing at the planer in the shop on a Tuesday morning running a piece of white oak through the blades, and his heart just stopped. The paramedics said he was gone before he hit the floor. I got the call at my desk in Portland. Gwen, my business partner, drove me to Meridian because my hands wouldn't stop shaking long enough to grip a steering wheel. When I arrived, Mason was already holding court in the living room, accepting condolences, shaking hands with men from the Rotary Club. He'd put on a blazer. He looked like a man who'd been rehearsing for this role his entire life. I handled everything else: the funeral home arrangements, the death certificates, the insurance calls, the church bulletin. Martha was too hollowed out to function, and Mason was too busy being the grieving son in public to do any of the grieving son work in private. I didn't complain. That's my flaw, if you want to call it that. I see a gap and I fill it. I see a job nobody wants and I take it. Over-responsibility, my therapist calls it the compulsion to carry everything yourself because nobody taught you it was safe to put things down. After the funeral, I noticed something. Martha had a meeting with Raymond Vance, my parents' estate attorney, at his office on 3rd Street. She went alone. She came back quieter than usual, but steadier, like someone who'd made a decision. I asked if everything was okay. She patted my hand. "Your father's affairs are complicated," she said. "Voss is sorting it out." I didn't push. I should have, but I had Lily to get back to, and a firm to run, and a mother who seemed like she wanted to carry this one thing by herself. So I let her. Martha had a stroke 6 weeks ago. She was sitting in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower bed she'd kept up since I was born, and something in her brain gave way. The neighbor found her face down in the marigolds. She died at Meridian Memorial 3 hours later. I was in the car within 20 minutes of the call. Lily sat in the back seat watching the Idaho farmland blur past the window, not saying anything because 7-year-olds can feel when something is too big for words. The funeral was at First Congregational, the church where 4 generations of Vances had been baptized and buried. 100 people came. Mason gave the eulogy. He stood at the pulpit in a charcoal suit, Tom Ford, if I had to guess, and spoke for 12 minutes. He talked about carrying the family name. He talked about the shop. He talked about what it meant to be a Vance's son, standing where his father and grandfather had stood. He mentioned Martha's cooking. He mentioned her garden. He did not mention that she'd spent the last 14 months alone in that house, managing a grief she shouldn't have had to manage by herself. He did not mention me at all. Afterward, in the fellowship hall, Aunt Carol, Martha's younger sister, pulled me aside and squeezed my arm. "Beautiful service," she said. "Your father would have been proud of Mason." I almost laughed. I didn't. At the coat rack, as I was helping Lily into her jacket, a man in a gray wool suit appeared beside me. Raymond Voss, 66 years old, dry as chalk dust, the kind of lawyer who measures words like a pharmacist measures pills. "Stay in town," he said quietly. Your father made changes to the will after Mason's troubles. You'll want to hear them, both of you together." Then he nodded once and walked away. 6 days after the funeral, Mason called me. I was in the kitchen of my parents' house, my mother's house, making oatmeal for Lily. The morning light came through the window over the sink the way it always had, flat and golden, catching the dust motes above the counter. "I need you out by Friday," Mason said. No preamble, no "how are you?" Just the demand like a contractor giving a deadline. "Excuse me, the house broke. It's mine. Dad made that clear for 30 years. Probate is a formality. Voss will confirm it. I need you and the kid out so Sloan and I can start the renovation." "The kid?" He called my daughter. "The kid. We haven't had the reading yet. I said there's nothing to read. You know the rule. The land stays with the Vance son." "You left. I stayed. End of discussion." I could hear Sloan in the background, her voice a bright, sharp thing. "Tell her Friday at the latest." "Babe." I gripped the counter. Lily was watching me from the tablespoon halfway to her mouth. "I'm not leaving until Voss reads the will," I said. "Then you'll leave with nothing," Mason said. And I want you to hear this exactly, because he said it like he'd practiced it, like it was a line in a script he'd been writing in his head for years. "Hope you. Enjoy being homeless, Clara. I made sure you get nothing." He hung up. I sat the phone on the counter face down. I finished making the oatmeal. I sat across from my daughter and I ate because that's what you do when someone tries to take the ground out from under you. You plant your feet and you eat your breakfast. When I tried my key on the front door that evening, the lock had already been changed. The brass key on its cracked leather fob, the one my father gave me at 18, saying, "For when you come home," turned in the cylinder and caught dead. The boxes were on the porch by the time I walked around back. 3 cardboard moving boxes, the cheap kind from the hardware store on Pike Street. Lily's clothes, my suitcase, Martha's recipe tin, the one she'd promised me, the one with index cards in her handwriting going back 40 years. All of it sitting in a half-inch of rainwater on the wooden planks where my mother used to drink her morning coffee. Sloan opened the front door. She was wearing a cream cashmere wrap and holding a glass of Sancerre like she was hosting a gallery opening. "Oh," she said, looking at me the way you'd look at a courier who showed up at the wrong address. "You're still here. Where's Lily's room?" I asked. "Where are her books?" Mason packed everything that was yours or hers. "This isn't really her home, Clara. She's visited, 4 times? She said it like geography was the measure of belonging, like a 7-year-old needed to earn her place in her own grandmother's house. I felt something lock into position behind my ribs. Not anger exactly, clarity. I walked to the car, loaded the boxes into the trunk, buckled Lily into her booster seat. Then I came back to the porch. Sloan was still standing there, sipping her wine, watching me like a show. "You can keep the locks," I said. "You can keep every room in this house, but you will not speak about my daughter again. Not to me, not to Mason, not to anyone in this town. That's not a request." Sloan's smile thinned. She stepped back inside and closed the door. I got in the car. Lily was holding her damp stuffed rabbit against her chest. "Where are we going, Mom?" she asked. I didn't have an answer yet. I just drove. We ended up at the Riverview Motel on Route 7, a mile outside town, $49 a night. 2 double beds, a microwave, and a window that looked out over the parking lot toward the river. Lily thought it was an adventure. She bounced on the bed and asked if we could order pizza. I said yes because I couldn't say anything else without my voice cracking. I sat on the edge of the other bed and stared at my phone. I had a condo in Portland. I had a life there, a good one. I could pack Lily up, drive 2 hours west, and never set foot in Meridian again. Let Mason have the house. Let him have the sign and the shop and the whole crumbling kingdom. I didn't need it. I'd built my own. But Voss had said, "Stay. Your father made changes." And Martha, my mother, had met with Voss alone after the first funeral and come back looking like a woman who'd set something down she'd been carrying for decades. I owed it to her to hear whatever this was. And honestly, and I'll be straight with you here, Meridian was the only place Lily had ever seen her grandparents. The backyard with the marigolds, the river path where my father used to take me fishing on Saturday mornings back before he decided I wasn't worth the time. The 18 acres behind the property, down by the water where the old boathouse sat under a canopy of sycamores. Lily loved that land. She called it the river place. So I stayed not to fight, not to win anything. I stayed because Voss asked, because my mother would have wanted me to hear it, and because my daughter deserved to know this town the way I used to, before the Vance name became something that only counted if you were born male. Raymond Voss's office was on the second floor of a limestone building on 3rd Street, 3 doors down from the shop. The stairwell smelled like old paper and lemon oil. His desk was walnut, built by my grandfather. The bookshelves behind him held 40 years of Idaho Revised Code and a framed photo of him shaking hands with my father at some Rotary dinner in the 90s. "Sit down, Clara," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. He didn't do small talk. I liked that about him. "The formal reading is next Thursday. Both you and Mason are required to be present. Required. Your father's will has a provision that can only be administered with both children in attendance. I'm the executive. Those are the terms." I leaned forward. "Voss, what did my father change?" He folded his hands on the desk, the way careful people do when they're choosing words. "After your brother's business difficulties, after your father co-signed certain obligations and restructured certain debts, Arthur revised a section of his will. He added a condition to the disposition of a specific asset." "Which asset?" "The back acres, the 18 acres along the river, including the boathouse." My chest tightened. "The river place." "What kind of condition?" "The kind that requires both beneficiaries to submit a verified financial statement before the asset can be awarded. Your father wanted proof, documented, certified proof that whoever receives that land can hold it without leveraging it, mortgaging it, or losing it to creditors." He paused. "Your father learned something, Clara. Late, but he learned it." "What did he learn?" Voss picked up a pen, a heavy silver thing engraved, and tapped it once on the desk. "That the loudest person in the room isn't always the one you should trust with the keys." He stood. "Thursday, 10 a.m. bring documentation. Bring Mason and Sloan moved into the house within 48 hours. By the weekend, they'd ripped out Martha's kitchen cabinets, the ones my grandfather had built, solid maple, dovetail joints, and replaced them with flat-pack modernist things from a catalog." Sloan posted photos to Instagram. "New chapter, honoring the legacy by making it ours, 72 likes." I drove past the shop on Monday and saw a hand-lettered sign taped to the window. Estate sale, tools, and equipment. Everything must go. My father's tools, his Drock knives, his hand planes. 30 years of carefully maintained steel. Each piece oiled and hung in order on the pegboard wall. Mason was selling them off like yard sale junk. I parked across the street and sat there for 10 minutes, engine running, watching strangers walk out, carrying my father's chisels in plastic bags. I almost drove away. Almost. Then I saw it shoved against the back wall behind a stack of scrap lumber. My father's toolbox, the old green metal one with the dented lid and the brass latch. The will had specifically left it to me. Personal hand tools and toolbox to Clara. The only thing my name was attached to. I walked in. Mason was at the counter counting cash. He looked up. "You're not welcome here." "That toolbox is mine," I said. "Dad's will lists it. You know that?" He stared at me for a long beat. Then he shrugged. "Take it. It's junk anyway, just like everything else he left you." The toolbox was heavier than I expected. I carried it to the car with both arms. Set it in the trunk next to Lily's car seat. Something shifted inside when I put it down. A metallic scrape, like an object sliding against the tin lining. I didn't open it yet. I wish I had. I want to pause here because I know some of you have held a box like this. The only thing a parent left you while someone else took the house. If that's you, tell me in the comments what was in your box. A ring, a Bible, a set of measuring cups. I want to hear it. And if this story is landing, subscribe so the algorithm stops burying it. Okay, back to that toolbox. And the woman who showed up at my motel room 3 days later. Aunt Carol showed up at the Riverview Motel on a Wednesday evening, unannounced, with a Tupperware of potato soup and an agenda. She was 63, Martha's younger sister, a retired school secretary who'd lived in Bel Air her whole life. She wore a fleece vest and orthopedic shoes and an expression that was trying very hard to look sympathetic. "I heard about the house," she said, settling onto the edge of the bed like she owned the room. Lily was doing homework at the little desk. Carol glanced at her once, then turned back to me. "Clara, honey, I know this feels unfair, but you need to understand. This is how it's always been. Your father's father did the same thing. My father did the same thing. Boys keep the land. Girls marry out." There it was. The family catechism straight from the book of Arthur Vance. "Carol, I'm not married," I said. "I have a 7-year-old daughter sleeping in a motel room because my brother threw our things in the rain. And that's terrible. It is, but fighting it will only make things worse." She leaned forward. "I gave up my share of your grandfather's farm, 40 acres. I signed it over to my brother because that's what was expected. And you know what? I survived. You will, too." She said it like survival was the ceiling, like a woman's highest ambition should be to endure the theft with grace. "Did you want those 40 acres? Carol?" She blinked. For half a second, something honest moved across her face, a flicker of old anger, old loss, the kind that calcifies into acceptance because the alternative is too heavy. "It doesn't matter what I wanted," she said. "It matters what works." She left the soup. She left her advice. And she left me sitting in that motel room, understanding for the first time that Carol wasn't just enabling the tradition. She was its oldest casualty. The next morning, I set up my laptop on the motel desk, made a pot of terrible coffee from the in-room machine, and went back to being Clara Vance, CPA, CFE, founder of a forensic accounting practice that had billed $14 million in fees last fiscal year. Lily sat on the bed watching cartoons with the volume low while I reviewed a fraud referral from a manufacturing company in Akron. Numbers studied me. They always had. Numbers don't play favorites. They don't care if you're a son or a daughter. They just tell you what's true. At noon, I called Gwen Avery, my partner at the firm. Technically the managing partner now since I'd sold my majority stake, but kept an advisory role and a meaningful equity position. "How's small-town life treating you?" she asked. My brother sold my father's tools, and my aunt brought me potato soup and a lecture about knowing my place. Charming. Do they still think you're a bookkeeper? They think I'm a bookkeeper who can't afford her own apartment. Gwen was quiet for a beat. Then, Clara, do they even know what you're worth? I looked out the window at the parking lot. My Honda Civic sat between a pickup truck and a minivan. No one in Meridian had ever seen the inside of my portfolio. No one had ever asked. They never asked, I said. And you never told them? No. Why? I thought about it. The honest answer was complicated. Pride, stubbornness, the leftover sting of being told my work was a hobby. But the simplest answer was this: because I shouldn't have to prove my value to people who decided I had none before I was old enough to talk. Gwen let out a long breath. Fair enough. But Clara, if there's a reading and if something's at stake, you might have to show those numbers whether you want to or not. 2 days before the reading, I drove past the house on Maple Lane to check on Martha's garden. Old habit. The marigolds were already dying. Nobody was watering them. But that's not what stopped me. There was a man on the front porch, mid-40s, wearing a polo shirt with a bank logo on the chest. He was speaking to Mason through the screen door, and Mason's voice had a pitch I'd never heard before. Tight, defensive, almost pleading. The estate will cover it, Mason was saying. Once probate clears, I'll have access to everything. You'll get your payment. Mr. Vance, this notice is the third we've sent. The balance on the second mortgage is past due by. I said the estate will cover it. Mason saw me parked at the curb, and his expression shifted from panic to fury in about 2 seconds. He stepped out, slammed the screen door, and the banker retreated to his sedan without finishing his sentence. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. I just watched a second mortgage on the house Mason was already treating as his personal property, on the house he'd thrown me out of, on the house he claimed was worth fighting for. Something my father always said came back to me. One of his less terrible sayings, a man who borrows against his foundation is a man standing on a trap door. I'd assumed Arthur was talking about the shop, about keeping the business debt-free. But sitting in my car, watching the banker's sedan disappear down Maple Lane, I started to wonder if my father had been talking about Mason all along. I drove back to the motel. I didn't open the toolbox that night, either. Something told me I should wait until I was ready for whatever was inside, but I was running out of reasons to wait. The night before the reading, I finally opened the toolbox. Lily was asleep. The motel room was quiet except for the hum of the mini fridge and the occasional truck passing on Route 7. I set the green metal box on the bed and unlatched the brass clasp. Inside, a coping saw, a small block plane, a set of marking gauges, and beneath them, tucked against the tin lining like someone had placed them there deliberately, 3 things that changed everything. The first was the carpenter's pencil. Not just any pencil. This one had been sharpened recently. And on the flat side, scratched in my father's cramped handwriting, ATCBV, Arthur Vance to Clara Vance. An arrow, a transfer, like he was passing something forward. The second was the brass key, the same shape as the one on my leather fob, the one that no longer opened the front door. But this key was different, smaller, older. I turned it over in my hand and saw a tag wired to the bow, the kind of metal tag you'd find on a storage locker. Stamped into it, Boathouse, Back Acres. Not the house key. Never the house key. This was the key to the boathouse on the 18 acres along the river. The place my father used to take me fishing. The place Lily called the river place. The third thing was a folded document. I opened it with hands that were steadier than they should have been given what I was looking at. It was a lien notice from First Federal Savings. A second mortgage on the house at 14 Maple Lane, dated 3 years ago for $340,000. My father's signature was at the bottom. In the margin in pencil, he'd written 7 words. Clara asked Voss about the back acres. I read it twice. Then I picked up my phone and called Voss at 11 p.m. He answered on the second ring like he'd been waiting. "You found the lien notice?" Voss said. Not a question. $340,000, I said, on the house. Your father took a second mortgage 3 years ago to cover your brother's debts. Mason's spec home venture collapsed. He'd overextended on 2 properties in Caldwell, borrowed from private lenders at predatory rates. He was facing personal bankruptcy. Your father co-signed the original loans and then refinanced everything against the house to consolidate. I sat on the motel bed and pressed the phone against my ear. So, the house Mason just kicked me out of is encumbered heavily. The equity is negligible. The shop building carries a separate lien, smaller, about $40,000 from a supplier Mason never paid. Together, the homestead parcel your brother is set to inherit comes with roughly $380,000 in secured debt against maybe $400,000 in asset value. He's inheriting a break-even, if he's lucky, if the market holds, which given the current rate environment is not guaranteed. I looked at the lien notice in my hand, my father's handwriting in the margin, and the back acres. The 18 acres along the river are the only unencumbered asset in the estate. No liens, no mortgages, current appraised value, approximately $1.1 million. Your father knew that if he left it outright to Mason, it would be leveraged within a year. So, he added the condition I mentioned. Both children submit verified financial statements, and the land passes to whichever child can demonstrate the ability to hold it debt-free. Dead hand control, I said. I knew the term. I'd seen it in estate cases. Exactly. It's enforceable. Idaho probate courts uphold conditional bequests routinely. He paused. Your father learned something, Clara, the hard way. But he learned it. I hung up and sat there for a long time, holding the brass key in one hand and the pencil in the other. Voss called both of us the next morning to explain the requirement. Mason's reaction was immediate and loud. I could hear him through the phone even though Voss had us on separate lines. A financial statement? Fine, happy to. I've got nothing to hide. He did have something to hide. He had $380,000 of something to hide. But Mason had spent his whole life believing that confidence was the same as competence, and this was no different. He submitted his verified statement to Voss by noon. Then he called me. Just so you know, he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice, I already turned in my paperwork. The land is mine by sundown tomorrow. I stayed. I ran the shop. I carried the name. A piece of paper isn't going to change 30 years of Dad telling the whole town who his heir was. Okay, I said. Bring your little pay stub, Clara, or your W-2 or whatever it is calculator people file. It doesn't matter. Dad's condition was a formality. He knew I'd qualify. He just wanted it on record. Okay, I said again. Is that all you're going to say? Okay. What would you like me to say, Mason? Silence. Then, I'd like you to say you understand that the land, all of it, was always supposed to be mine. That's how this family works. That's how it's always worked. I looked at Lily, who was drawing a picture of a river at the motel desk with a green crayon. I understand exactly how this family works, I said. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up and called Gwen. I need a verified financial statement by 5 p.m. today, I said. Full portfolio, CPA certified, net worth summary on the front page. You're doing this? I'm doing the last thing my father ever asked me to do. I'll have it in 3 hours. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I sat in the motel parking lot with the engine off and the windows down, listening to the river. The Boise was half a mile away, but on still nights you could hear it. A low, constant sound like the town breathing. I didn't need the 18 acres. I had money. I had a career. I had a daughter who was healthy and smart, and who'd be fine whether we lived in Portland or on the moon. The rational part of my brain, the forensic accountant part, the part that ran cost-benefit analyses for a living, said, walk away. Let Mason have the land. Let him mortgage it, lose it, watch it get auctioned off by a bank. None of that was my problem. But the other part, the part that remembered Saturday mornings on the riverbank, my father showing me how to tie a clinch knot, the way the sycamores turned gold in October, the sound the boathouse door made when it opened on its rusted hinges. That part wouldn't let go. My father had written my initials on a pencil. He'd put a key to the boathouse in the toolbox he left me. He'd written, "Ask Voss" in the margin of a lien notice and tucked it where only I would find it. Those weren't accidents. Those were instructions from a man who'd spent his whole life believing the wrong thing and had finally, too late, started to see it. I picked up my phone and texted Gwen. "Send the statement to Voss." She replied in under a minute. "Already done. $5.83 million certified by Kowalski and Associates, independent CPA. You're on record." I looked at the river. I wasn't doing this to beat Mason. I was doing the last thing my father ever asked me. If that also happened to prove him wrong about everything he'd ever said about daughters, well, numbers don't lie. The morning of the reading, Sloane showed up at my motel room at 7 a.m. She was dressed like she was going to brunch. Silk blouse, linen trousers, a Tory Burch tote that probably cost more than my monthly motel bill. She had a manila envelope in her hand. "Can we talk?" she said, leaning against the doorframe with a smile that was trying very hard to look warm. Woman to woman. I let her in because I wanted to hear what she'd say. Lily was brushing her teeth in the bathroom. Sloane sat on the edge of the bed and opened the envelope. "This is a quitclaim deed," she said, sliding it across the comforter. "Mason asked me to bring it. You sign this. You release any claim to the estate, the house, the land, everything. And in exchange, Mason will give you $15,000 and all of Martha's personal photos." I looked at the document, 4 pages, crisp, printed, already notarized on Mason's side. He'd had a lawyer prepare this. He'd planned it. 15,000, I said. And photos. It's generous, Clara. Given that the will clearly favors Mason, you'd spend more than that on legal fees trying to contest it. This way, everyone walks away clean. No drama. No hard feelings. No hard feelings, I repeated. Your husband threw my daughter's sneakers in the rain. Sloane's smile didn't waver, but her eyes did. Mason can be impulsive, but he means well. He's under a lot of pressure right now. I'm sure he is. I folded the quitclaim and slid it back into the envelope. I don't sign things I haven't had time to review, I said. And I don't sign things under pressure in motel rooms. If Mason has an offer, he can present it through Voss. Sloane stood up. The warmth was gone. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'm just making it honest. She left without the envelope. I threw it in the trash. Gwen called at 8:30. Statements delivered to Voss's office. Certified, sealed, the whole package. Kowalski signed off personally. "Thank you, Clara." Her voice shifted. "Careful. When they open that envelope in a room full of people who think you're broke, you know what's going to happen, right? I knew. I'd run the scenario in my head a dozen times. The forensic accountant in me had already mapped the reactions. Mason's disbelief, Sloane's panic, Carol's confusion. The numbers on that statement told a story none of them had ever bothered to read. Net worth, $5,830,000. Broken down, $2.4 million from the firm sale, $1.9 million in diversified index holdings, $1.1 million in commercial real estate, 2 small office buildings in Portland I'd bought and managed myself, $430,000 in retirement accounts and cash reserves. I'd built every dollar of it. No inheritance, no family money, no husband's income. Just 17 years of being very good at something my family called a hobby. I know what's going to happen, I said. Are you ready for it? I looked at Lily, who was sitting on the bed, braiding the ears of her stuffed rabbit with the focused intensity only a 7-year-old can muster. This child had slept in a motel for 2 weeks because her uncle decided she didn't belong in her grandmother's house. She'd heard Sloane say, "This isn't really her home." She'd packed her own backpack without being asked because she was already learning that being a Vance girl meant carrying your own weight. "I'm ready," I said. "Good. Call me after." And Clara, "Yeah, make them say the number out loud." I almost smiled. Almost. Quick honesty check before the reading. People kept telling me to sign and walk away. Keep the peace. Accept my place. Maybe someone's telling you that right now about your own situation, your own family, your own inheritance, your own worth. So tell me, would you have signed that quitclaim? Comment yes or no and hit subscribe, because the next room I walked into is the one I'd been waiting 17 years to sit in. Let's go. Voss's office. Thursday, 10 a.m., the conference room smelled like lemon polish and old leather. A walnut table my grandfather had built sat in the center. 6 chairs around it, a pitcher of water, and 2 folders placed precisely at the head where Voss would sit. Mason arrived first. Charcoal suit, pocket square, Rolex catching the overhead light. He pulled out a chair and sat like a man about to accept an award. Sloane came in behind him, phone already out, probably composing a caption for later. Carol arrived next, clutching her purse strap with both hands, wearing the same fleece vest she'd worn to the motel. She nodded at me once and sat as far from Mason as the table allowed. I took the chair across from my brother. Lily was with a sitter at the motel. I decided she didn't need to see this, whatever this turned out to be. In my bag, next to the carpenter's pencil, I felt the weight of the brass key. And sitting there in that room with the morning light falling across the table, I suddenly understood something I'd missed for 20 years. The key my father gave me at 18, the one I'd carried on the cracked leather fob, the one I'd tried in the front door lock the night Mason changed it, had never been a house key. It was too small, too old. The teeth were wrong. It was the boathouse key, the key to the river place. My father had given me the key to the 18 acres when I was 18 years old, and I'd spent 17 years thinking it was something else entirely. Voss entered, closed the door, and took his seat. He placed his hands flat on the 2 folders. "We'll begin with your father's will," he said. "Then we'll address the final section." Mason smiled. I did not. Voss opened the first folder. Last Will and Testament of Thomas Edward Vance, revised 18 months ago, witnessed and notarized in Ada County, Idaho. He read the standard provisions, debts, funeral expenses, executive appointment in the flat, measured tone of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Then he reached the distribution. To my son, Mason Thomas Vance, I leave the following. The residential property at 14 Maple Lane, Meridian, Idaho, including all structures. The commercial property at 312 3rd Street known as Vance and Son Woodworks, including all fixtures and remaining inventory, and all real property comprising the homestead parcel as recorded in Ada County deed records. Mason leaned back. He didn't smile. He did something worse. He nodded slowly like a king, confirming what he already knew. To my daughter, Clara Ellen Vance, I leave my personal hand tools and toolbox. That was it. One line. 35 years of being Arthur Vance's daughter reduced to a green metal box and a set of chisels. Carol exhaled softly. Sloane was already typing on her phone. Mason turned to me. "The land stays with the Vance son," he said, and the phrase rang through that room like a bell he'd been waiting his whole life to strike. "I'm sorry it had to be this way, Clara, but Dad made his choice. He always made his choice." I said nothing. I looked at Voss. Voss looked back at me with an expression that was almost, the ghost of patience. "Mr. Vance," Voss said. "We're not finished." Mason waved a hand. "What's left?" She got the toolbox. I got the house. "It's done." "It is not done." Voss closed the first folder and placed his hand on the second. "Your father's will contains one final section, and I am required by the terms of the document to read it aloud to both of you before any asset can transfer." Mason's confidence didn't crack. It hardened. He stood up, actually stood up from his chair like he was about to give a toast at his own coronation, and looked around the room. "A final section," he repeated. "Fine, read it. But let's be clear about what's happening here." He pointed at me. "My sister left this family when she was 18 years old. She moved to Portland. She got a job pushing numbers. She didn't run the shop. She didn't maintain the property. She didn't carry the name. I did all of that every year, every holiday. Every time a pipe burst, or a roof leaked, or Dad needed someone to co-sign a." He stopped, caught himself. "I stayed." He finished. "And she left. That's the math. That's always been the math." Then he turned to me with the full weight of 41 years of entitlement behind his eyes. "Hope you enjoy being homeless, Clara. I made sure you get nothing." The same words, the same script. He'd said it on the phone 6 days ago. He was saying it again now in front of witnesses. Like repetition could make it true. Sloane nodded along. Carol stared at the table. Voss waited. He waited the way a man waits who has read the next page and knows what's coming. When Mason sat down, Voss opened the second folder. "The final section of Thomas Edward Vance's will," he said, "concerns the disposition of a parcel not included in the homestead grant. Specifically, 18 acres of unencumbered riverfront land in Ada County, including the structure known as the boathouse, appraised at $1.1 million. Mason blinked. Sloane's phone stopped moving. Carol looked up. "This parcel," Voss continued,